Hi, I'm Tara McGowan. I am the founder and publisher of COURIER Newsroom, a pro democracy media outlet that you can find on all your socials. I am so excited to be launching this new series for the last 10 weeks of the election with my dear friend Simon Rosenberg, who I talk to all the time about the state of the presidential election and down ballot races across the country and tactics and strategies and grassroots energy, and most importantly, hopium, his coined term. And Simon and I decided to have these conversations and bring in other voices, candidates running in some of the most competitive races in the country right now, some of the top strategists overseeing state parties and advocacy organizations, and friends that have worked at the intersection of politics and media and technology over the past few years to really try to understand this really wild election that we know is going to be very driven by vibes and is a bit of a bridge builder, I think. And I have talked about between generations and kind of old playbooks and new playbooks for how elections are run and won ultimately. And so, Simon, I'm so delighted to be doing this with you.
Oh, thanks so much. I think we're going to have a great time and help people understand the magic of this moment. I mean, we want to help people connect to this idea, both of that we're in this magical moment, but also that the need to close strong and to make sure that we not just show up, we win this thing together in the final 10 weeks. So I'm really excited to be here with you. I think we've got some great guests in the coming weeks, and I think this is going to be a terrific project.
I'm super stoked about it. So, today, actually, for our first episode, we have someone I'm a super fan of. I know you are too, who's going to be joining us in a little bit, Anderson Clayton. She is the North Carolina Democratic Party chair. She is the youngest state party chair in the country. She is an absolute spitfire. She tells it like it is. She is a strong organizer and fighter for her party and for the campaigns that she's overseeing resourcing in North Carolina. And North Carolina is a battleground state this election, isn't it, Simon?
Yeah, listen, it is the one of the 7 battlegrounds. It's the one we didn't win last time, so it's an expansion state for us, and we have real opportunity there. I mean, not only do we have, as Anderson put in something really important we haven't had, which is an incredibly strong state party and ground game, but on the Republican side, there is an extremist, Mark Robinson, running as for the governorship of North Carolina, who's even crazier than Trump. And I think what it's doing is it's creating a moment for the people of North Carolina to help move the state away from the extremists that have been in charge for so long. It is a special moment, a special election. She's an incredible leader, and I'm really glad she's going to be joining us in a little bit.
Yeah, North Carolina has broken our hearts before, but I will never forget how.
Not this time, not this
No,
time,
not
Tara.
this time. How did turn it blue in 2008. I actually made a video in the 2012 campaign about that for North Carolina. So it's definitely it's possible, and I think you're right. And I can't wait to hear how she's thinking about taking the energy on the ground and online and turning it into a groundswell of votes there. And then later on, we're going to be joined by Makena Kelly, who is a tech reporter for Wired magazine, who is covering the presidential race and the role of the internet and social media and content creators and memes and coconut pilling and all of those things. So we'll talk to her in a little bit. But in getting started with our very first episode, we have to lead, Simon, with what you do best, which is giving us your take on the state of the race, the polls that we love and hate, and how we pay attention to those. But let's get into it. What is the current state of the race about 68 days out from Election Day?
Yeah, and 22 days out before early in-person voting begins, which is even more kind of mind-blowing, right? Yeah, listen, we should feel good about where we are. I mean, we had a remarkable convention, an historic convention, an inspiring convention last week. I mean, this was my ninth convention, and it was by far and away the most powerful and emotional and passionate. And I think the big thing, we've seen it very briefly, right? We've seen a change in the polls. The polls have moved about 7 points towards the Democrats nationally. The vice president is either even or tied. I mean, either even or ahead in all the battleground states now. We continue to see encouraging polling this week. We've had, the first round of convention, post-convention polling is encouraging. The polling in the Senate is also very encouraging. We're doing very well in most of the Senate races. The only race that looks like it's very, that is a toss-up right now is John Tester's race in Montana. The House Democrats are feeling much like the presidential race now, where they're seeing a huge influx of money and volunteers, which is making all of their campaigns stronger. And the net effect of Kamala Harris sort of getting Democrats fired up is that we have a lot of districts we need to win in places like New York and California, which are much more likely now to flip than they were before. There's a lot of optimism there. We also know that this infusion of money and volunteers has made all of our, the presidential campaign stronger. We're going to close stronger than they are because of the unprecedented infusion of money and volunteers. But I think for me, what happened at the convention was something very powerful, is also going to be critical to how we close and how we win this election, which is that the ideology of the Democratic Party to me that we heard last week wasn't progressive or moderate. It wasn't neo-populist or neoliberal, all these terms. It was based around love of country and this sort of powerful patriotism that was really the unifying theme, I think, for the entire 4 days. And you heard Republicans talking about how patriotic Democrats are. You heard Kamala Harris in her closing speech talk about the greatness and goodness of America. I mean, this was a uplifting, powerful event. And that sense of optimism and hope and love of country, I think, helped create space for all the politicians to aim higher and go deeper and to sort of be at their very best, which is one of the reasons this all felt so inspiring. So I think the Democratic Party that comes out of the convention is just so strong by every measure. I mean, something that you and I have talked about is the successful passing of the baton to this new generation that is so clearly ready to lead. In every way that we look at our party right now, we're strong, we're united, we're on offense, right? We've got strong arguments to make. I think we're in touch with the American people. And it all has made Trump and his team look smaller and more irrelevant and more desperate and kind of pathetic. And so I feel really good about where we are, but recognizing, man, do we have a lot of work to do to close strong, to win this thing out. But I would, in every way imaginable, much rather be us than them at this point.
Yeah, and I just want to underscore, you talking about how it really was about love of country, and I think part of that is also love and acceptance and respect of each other, and without it being sort of like, shoving anything down anyone's throat, right? Really coming at it of this place of like real unity and celebration of our diversity as a country and a party, and that being so represented. And I think about and have watched this video clip too many times because I think one of my favorite clips that came out of the convention was this woman. She had not missed a convention outside of the virtual one that we experienced in 2020, but in something like 40 something or 50 years. When she was asked how this one was different, she said,
"Each one has been so exciting, but this one especially, it's for women. It's for everyone. I feel like the world is opening up to everybody."
And I don't really know how to put a finger on it, but it feels like it is just showing the best of everyone. And that is the best of America. And it's just like such this heartwarming clip of her like understanding this moment and having seen so much and been to so many conventions through her life and really feeling like we are really on the precipice of an incredible paradigm shift in the party and in the country when it comes to, how politics is run and who is representing people and how everybody can be represented and that not need to feel actually so political or ideological, right? It's just kind of about humanity and patriotism and love of country. I'm still feeling those vibes and that energy, but I also, know that we're clear-eyed about things. And so I am always cautiously optimistic and also worried that, anyone can get stuck sort of in our own echo chambers and especially
Yeah.
feeling all of the joy from the convention, like really wondering, is that energy reaching the, least engaged Americans and Americans who don't vote in elections or maybe weren't excited before, maybe they're starting to get invested, but we know that the election is going to be close. So I'm curious, what are the things that you are worried about over the next, 68 days?
Well, I mean, let me come to that, but let me start by doing an interim thing, which is something that you were alluding to, which is one of the reasons it's so important to do the work now, to be volunteering and making phone calls and texting and postcarding and canvassing, is because voters are waking up to the election. This is a new and dynamic, exciting moment, and the ability for us to reach voters right now through all the various ways we have of reaching voters is almost more important in the next few weeks than it's even going to be like in the last 10 days, because if we can reach people who are interested and they hear from us now, they get a contact and door knock, a call, and we let them know that we want them to be part of our politics, the way that you were describing, that in some ways the great antidote to Trumpism is, which is so much about pitting us against each other, the sense that there's zero sum, that I've got to take mine before somebody else gets theirs, right? And sort of this incredible competition of Americans against one another, this idea that we're all in this together and that all voices were represented so beautifully at the convention is makes us a very welcoming enterprise. And I think that part of the way we have to be welcoming is by being super aggressive in our volunteerism over the next few weeks to make it very clear that, if we touch people and they get a phone call, they get a door knock, it really means something now, because it means that we're inviting them into our politics. So I think, to your point about the vibes and does it translate into actual progress, it can be if we actually go do the work. I mean, one of the most amazing statistics that I heard was that 200,000 people signed up, or 200,000 volunteer shifts, people signed up during the week of the convention. Well, if you're listening to this, make sure that you're helping us get to 400,000 volunteer shifts, in the next few weeks for Harris and Walz, because this is a critical time for us to be reaching people. What do I worry about? I think in some ways I'm worried. I don't know that I have any deep worries right now, to be honest. I mean, I would normally say I'm worried that we're not taking advantage and being ambitious enough to take advantage of the moment, because I think part of what's driving our politics since the spring of 2022 and Dobbs is that we just keep overperforming and Republicans keep struggling. Because I think with Dobbs, something broke inside the Republican Party, and that for a big chunk of the Republican Party, the MAGA Republican Party it had gone too far. It was too much, and they had become, they became distant from the Republican Party. And I've been most worried about us not having ambition enough to see that we can potentially win this election by more than a couple points, and building a campaign that can expand our coalition and grow our vote. And I'm convinced now the Harris campaign is doing that. I think they did it with the pick of Governor Walz, where they made it clear that people in rural communities and small towns are an integral part of our understanding of our coalition. And we saw it with them reaching out to Republicans during the coalition, where making it clear that they wanted Republicans to be part of this pro-democracy coalition. And you're seeing it now with the Georgia bus trip that the vice president's doing, and where she's going into rural Georgia and small towns where they're trying to reach out to voters that Democrats didn't traditionally reach out to. And so I'm very excited about, now I understand the strategy of the campaign is they're really trying, as Obama did, to expand the coalition, grow our understanding of what it means to be a Democrat, and try to win this election in a way that's a definitive repudiation of MAGA and that does incredible damage to this ideology, not just to the Republican Party. I mean, I think the key is we have to crush MAGA here. And I think the tools are there for us to do so if we put our heads down and do the work.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And, at the same time, so many Americans across this country are learning really about who Kamala Harris is and who Tim Walz are for the very first time. And there's a benefit to that from a strategy perspective. New information is stickier, especially, when you've known the two former candidates on the ticket, Biden and Trump, for so long. Having new candidates that folks don't know that well, it means that there's a lot of opportunity there, but it also means there's a lot of work to do. And we can't also lose sight, to your point, of making sure that Americans know the contrast, and we keep that contrast front and center every day, because we also know that is in large part why Democrats have overperformed since 2016 is a referendum on MAGA and on Trump and on his policies and on the really out of touch and extremist positions of Trump in the party. And we've seen that now with him even trying to distance himself, very, very unsuccessfully from Project 2025, his actual playbook. But I always worry about anyone being smug, right? We're resting on any laurels of energy. We know that we can't do that, but we also need to be able to embrace the joy, and also for a minute, the fact that they are struggling and they are on defense, and we're not seeing a real coherent strategy right now out of the Trump campaign. I don't know that will stick. I think that they are ruthless. He is ruthless. He is desperate. He needs to keep himself out of jail. So, this is not locked at all by any means. So we have to stay clear-eyed and vigilant. And to your point, just make sure that all that energy gets moved into volunteer shifts and donation dollars and the actual work that's going to get Democrats over the finish line.
Tara, can I ask you a question? As someone who's a media professional, who's been such an innovator, an important innovator and thinker about how we communicate in this new changing, information landscape, can you reflect a little bit about what you saw at the convention last week and the sort of the prominence of creators, content creators, all this new language of influencers? I mean, you've been doing this a little while, right? You were part of the Obama world. What was your reaction to what we saw last week from an information angle?
Oh, it was really, really heartening and exciting to see how the DNC and how the Harris Walls campaign have fully embraced building relationships and communities with content creators, not just who care about democracy or want to oppose MAGA and fascism and Trump, but who are food creators and lifestyle creators and wellness creators whose audiences that they've built trust with on platforms like YouTube and TikTok and Instagram are not politically engaged, are not paying close attention, are not reading political news or commentary, and that they're now being reached with messages that are really authentic to them from a messenger or messengers that they really respect and follow and feel a connection with. And that, we weren't seeing that as much when Biden was at the top of the ticket. I think that campaign was really struggling to get more folks to want to use their platforms and, their currency that they have on these social platforms because of an enthusiasm gap or fear that there would be backlash in their audience. And that's not what we're seeing now. And I do have to say, like, having been in this work for a long time and wearing different roles, I and a lot of my friends and colleagues starting in, 2011, 2012 and onward, really after the Obama campaign, because they embraced social and they really empowered young people and creativity and trying new things. But beyond the Obama campaign, the Democratic Party and a lot of progressive organizations still were really behind the curve. Truly, like still today, I think that, Democratic organizations and campaigns still overspend on television, given how few of the voters we need are watching it now, or they still overinvest in getting local news stories written that are going to be trapped behind a paywall, that a lot of voters that actually need that information or need to know where candidates stand aren't ever going to see. And yet we have really seen this incredible embracing and adoption of working with content creators who are the new best avenue for marketing and reaching niche audiences. And that's really heartening to me because that's not a given in a world
Right.
that holds dear to conventional wisdom and old tried and true playbooks and tactics. And frankly, it's part of the generational change I think we're seeing. It needs to happen at every level, not just the candidates running for office, but also the folks that are leading the organizations that spend the most money and really drive the strategic plans and decision making about how resources are spent and who we're reaching and how in really authentic ways. And we're starting to really see that.
Well, I've always thought that politics is a lot more like jazz than classical music in the sense that, you have to have a plan, right? And you have to have a theory of the case, but you're also every day you're inventing and you're making things up, and every day is a new day. And you've got to have both, I think, this idea of following a plan and having a strategy and being confident enough to allow the moment to drive you as well, right? To not prevent the moment from cutting off opportunities that you may have through invention and through trying. And I think for me, one of the most exciting things about this current moment is that the Harris campaign is just letting go. I mean, they are inventing every day. There's an incredible sense of invention and innovation where they're trying new things. And I think in politics, you're at your strongest as an organization or a candidate when you let go. I mean, you have to stay on the plan, right? I mean, hopium is hope with a plan. We don't just hope the election's going to turn out well. We have a plan to make it so, and we do the work to make it so. But it's also not being so blind or being so rigid that you also lose opportunities. And I think one of the reasons this moment feels so powerful, I think, is because it's being invented in front of us every day, that we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. How is Kamala going to, what is she going to say about this? This thing is emerging in front of us. It's not emerged. And I want to give the campaign enormous credit and the candidate enormous credit for allowing this kind of wild innovation that's happening around them in such a short period of time. And I think it is why this series we're doing, I think, is going to be so interesting because, we want to look at, I think, this moment through a traditional political lens, but also through this lens of wild innovation that's happening right now that is a critical part of the moment, and to really spend time, digesting it and understanding it, because it is part of what makes this moment, I think, unique. And it's also one of the central reasons that we're closing so strong, in my view.
And that is a perfect segue. Let's bring Anderson on to have a conversation.
One of our all-time faves, Anderson Clayton, North Carolina Party Chair. Anderson, welcome.
Thanks for having me all.
So listen, for those who don't know, I mean, as we've discussed, I mean, North Carolina was, of all the battleground states, was the one that we didn't win in 2020. You had the hardest job of all the battleground state chairs. We all considered this as a real opportunity, in part because Mark Robinson, your gubernatorial candidate on the Republican side, was just as extreme or more so than Trump. And so there was going to be incredible opportunity this year for you to make gains and have a really good election. Give us an update. I mean, how's it going? How do you feel? How do things feel just a few weeks before, early voting begins? And, are you happy with where things are?
I think the excuse my voice in the way that it sounds right now because we just got back from the DNC convention, but I think the energy on the ground is electric. I think that people are really excited to see the momentum that North Carolina has been able to build up, and I finally think that the polls are starting to tell what we've been noticing on the ground for the last year and a half, that people are angry. Republicans have done far too much in our state to take advantage of it. And people are ready to get to the polls in November to defeat Mark Robinson, Donald Trump, Dan Bishop, Michelle Morrow, and all of our state legislative candidates that have tied themselves to him, quite frankly.
And just so everybody knows, the polls in the last few weeks, almost every poll has Kamala Harris either tied or ahead in North Carolina. There's been a real shift. It's actually been one of our best performing states in polling over the last, since she became the candidate. So congratulations on that, Anderson.
We don't ride the roller coaster down here though, Simon. And like they were also really bad a few months ago too. And so we are trying to make sure that we're doing everything ground wise to make sure that the 74,000 votes that we lost by in 2020 carry us back. I think it's great for people to get excited about polls right now. I actually think that they're one of the worst things in the entire world in some ways too, for how like lack of motivation or like they kind of lull people into this like, oh, I don't have to worry. And I'm like, no, you should worry. Everyone should be worried. Everyone should be running around like their pants are on fire right now, in my opinion, trying to make sure that they have a voter registration form in their purse that you're carrying with you to every grocery store line you're in. If you're asking any person that's talking to you randomly, your first question back to them should be, are you registered to vote?
I couldn't agree more, Anderson, about the polling. And I think the only thing is like they're always close, right? Whether we're up a few points or down a few points, it's like the message.
And there's always a margin of error. And I'm like,
exactly. And as my friend Mike Podhorser always likes to say, it's about the margin of effort, right? It's like exactly what you said, do all of the work. So in the years that I have been working in politics and campaigns, North Carolina has kind of been a bit of a heartbreak story. Since 2008, when Obama turned it blue, and not Obama, but the work and the grassroots energy on the ground and everything. And, we've come so close. And yet, of course, you guys have had really a lot of success on the gubernatorial side. I hope and believe that will be true again this time. But there's also a history of, I think, ticket splitting and just lower turnout of different constituency groups. And it comes down to resources often. So I'm really curious, do you guys feel like you're getting the resources, especially from the national side and the presidential campaign and the energy around the presidential, that's needed to get as many people on the rolls and turned out?
We are getting more investments than we ever have before as a state like North Carolina. And I think that they are preparing hard to make sure that they're looking at us as a seventh battleground state, which means that we are getting more resources. It was earlier than it ever was since 2020. And I think that what they're doing right now is making sure that we've got offices across the state. They utilized county party offices that were already infrastructure here, that we had been, honestly, county parties that had offices for almost 5 or 6 years in the state. The coordinated came in and are helping pay their rent right now. And so it's a real partnership, I would say, between trying to make sure the infrastructure that we had was able to carry through with what the campaign needed this year. And then they're also adding staff onto that ground too. So I'd say that we are getting the resources and the time and the energy that we did not get and that we did not receive in 2020 that we needed in a timely manner.
I would love to hear kind of your take on like ticket splitting though in North Carolina, like a history of folks that might go Democratic for the governor's race, knowing that you guys have a really competitive one right now and an absolutely horrific Republican candidate running in Mark Robinson, and what how you guys sort of adjust for that as you think about that when you're talking to voters at the doors or on the phones or over text message.
I think we just don't ignore voters. I mean, typically there would be people that would say, well, we don't go talk to Trump voters, or people that would say, like, we are voting for Donald Trump. And I'm like, all right, well, have you asked them about the governor's race yet? And I think that that needs to be everybody's mentality, is that, like, down ballot people in North Carolina, I do think that they vote a lot of times for the people versus the party. And a lot of times Republican candidates do a really good job of getting out to these communities, introducing themselves to people, making the case. And that's traditionally been the case. This year, Democrats have been doing that. So you'll see people like Braxton Winston, who's running for commissioner of labor in North Carolina, and Josh Stein, who's running for governor, out at Lumbee Homecoming a few months ago, right? Where they were walking in a 2.5 mile parade line, shaking everybody's hand in that community, because we know right now the number one place that people are getting their information, it's not on a television screen or on a phone screen. It's really coming from your community. It's coming from the people around you. It's coming from the folks in your life that are saying, this person is someone I believe in. It's someone you should believe in too. I would say the reason why we're so concerned about that, and the reason why we're doing that this year, is because I think that we've got to build back, relationships with people one step at a time. And that means that you may not vote for a Democrat at the top of the ticket, but you could vote for one down ballot. And in future cycles, that's going to hopefully lead you to voting for one at the top of the ticket, because you now know a locally elected Democrat. The ways in which that in some of my communities, I feel like information silos and Fox News and places have just ruined them. It's because of the fact that people don't know these folks and they don't know these candidates. But that is one way, I guess. Otherwise, we're also talking to them about policies. I mean, like, one of my organizers the other day, literally, Sarah O'Brien, who's my organizing director, she texted me and she goes, we knocked a house with 2 Trump signs on it, and as soon as we left, they took them down. Like, I don't think that people are, they just haven't been talked to. Like, there's so much misinformation around. Like, the biggest power that we could have would be on the doors this year. And I just think that so many people are scared to knock doors and scared to talk to people around them, that might be the one reason why we don't. Right.
I've been working and helping you since November last year. I always believed that this was a state that we could win. I'm so proud of what you've been able to do, because one of the missing pieces in North Carolina, so we just didn't have the on the ground infrastructure and the kind of investment that you've been making and doing what you just said, which is talking to people, right? In the way that we know how to talk to people. How do you feel about where your field organization is at this point? And also talk a little bit about what's going on with young people and what's happened with the dynamics since Kamala became our candidate.
Yeah, well, thank you so much to Simon and your community for all that you have done for us, because North Carolina would not be where it is today without people that did invest early in us. And I think that's so important. Every bit of what we've been able to do, building up a field operation on the ground, has been able to make sure that we're knocking doors in counties that haven't had doors knocked in them. And those 74,000 votes that I referenced earlier in 2020 that we lost by, it's 42 votes per every precinct in every county. Barack Obama only won our state by 4 votes per precinct in every county. And when you look at the idea of where do those votes come from, they come from all over North Carolina. We're not a state like Georgia or Texas, or, well, not technically Texas necessarily in that sense, but they do have a Houston and Dallas, but where you've got like one major metropolitan area that really is the largest portion. So like a Michigan, right, with Detroit, like that's 42% of their population right there, just in a Detroit metro area alone. That's not North Carolina. North Carolina is a state that has 59% of its population actually that still lives in a rural community. And I think that the important part of that is knowing that you can't just chase the Mecklenburgs where Charlotte is, the Wakes where Raleigh is. You've got to chase the Wilsons, right, where Wilson is. You've got to chase the Cherokee counties where Murphy is. And you've got to chase the places where Democrats are coming out. And our field team has been able to do that this year. And that's an operation where typically in the past, the state party has taken on the mindset of that you've only got to be in 20 counties in the state and that's it. And we've made it so no, you need to be operating in all 100 counties. There needs to be someone, a candidate, a campaign, a county party that's out there talking to voters in every single community. And so we've been able to do that. Our organizers are out knocking doors this weekend. The greatest joy of my life was getting to see in a year from our calendar, our organizing calendar, from going to have 1 canvas every Saturday to having 15 every Saturday in different parts of the state. And we were also able, we knocked around 10,000 doors this last weekend alone. When you look at minivan and the top 10 places in the country country for where activity happened this last weekend. Two of them are coming out of North Carolina, both Raleigh and both Charlotte. So we're excited about the ground game, and we think that's what's going to win us this election this year. Not just for the presidency, but also for the governor's race and for some competitive state legislative races to give him back that veto power that we need going into 2025.
And Anderson, there are so many young people in the state, and that have been a community that perhaps we have not done as well as we've needed to in the past. Can you talk a little bit about what's happened on the ground since Kamala's become the candidate with young people?
A wave of excitement amongst young folks, but also the real thing that we've done this year in North Carolina that I'm so proud of is that we've been able to lead a youth organizing program where we've been able to put 30 college campus fellows across the UNC system and across college campuses outside of the UNC system as well. So our HBCUs, looking at both public and private in the state, and then also looking at other MSIs, minority serving institutions in North Carolina, and also making sure that we're reaching out to people. We believe that young folks should be organizing young people. Theodore Nollert, who's the city councilman out of Chapel Hill, he won his race, one of the youngest people to ever win a city council race in Chapel Hill last year in 2023, is actually leading that program this year for us. And so very excited to be able to have folks that have just recently been working with young people to also be able to leading this program. But Theo helped up voter turnout for UNC students by 2% in his city council race that only lasted around 6 weeks for him. And so we're really excited to see what he can do with the amount of resources that we're going to be able to put into college campuses this year.
That's fantastic. Anderson, I have to ask, because our newsroom at Courier in North Carolina, Cardinal and Pine, had been covering very closely the state legislature's bills and horrific work that they passed on an abortion ban in the state of North Carolina. You're in a state where people have seen this happen up close, the Project 2025 agenda starting to go in place in states like yours. And we know that abortion is one of the most mobilizing and salient issues for voters of all parties, actually. And we know the majority of voters support abortion access. So I'm curious if you're still feeling that that is really one of the top and most salient issues that you're hearing about from voters who maybe, haven't been paying attention or haven't been voting regularly in the state, as something that could be really mobilizing given how close, the folks in your state have been to this threat.
I think so. And that's something where I tell people, even before the big switch up, like, I love Kamala Harris. I'm so excited she's going to be our next president. But I also think that even before that happened, folks were negating the anger that was on the ground in North Carolina. And maybe it was just me that was seeing it, but I was like, man, I see it and I feel it everywhere I was going last year, of just the like, how dare a state legislature feel like they've got this much power and don't ever have to answer to the people of North Carolina. Because it was abortion rights, right? It was abortion rights in the term of taking us to a 12-week abortion ban, a 10-week medical abortion ban in the state. Even after, we had seen abortions rise 37% in North Carolina, because we were one of the last states for access in the South to it, besides Virginia, once Roe had fallen. It is also so much more than abortion that's on the ballot too, and that the state legislature has done this year. And I think especially for places like rural North Carolina right now, we're talking about abortion, but we're also talking about the fact that this state legislature stripped healthcare in general, or wanted to, from 600,000 people this last year, because they wanted to legalize gambling after being lobbied from casinos that are coming to us from Las Vegas right now. And I'm like, these folks are not people that represent North Carolina, or that represent the rural economies and that want to revitalize them, that make up the majority of this state right now. All they care about is padding their pockets, more consolidation in our state, and more corruption. And when you look at that, I'm like, no Republican unaffiliated that I know is buying into that right now. And we're even seeing it at our county commissioner levels. We're seeing good Republicans, right, that have been ousted from their local parties because they don't agree, or they don't have the Trump mentality that some of these other people have. And we're seeing it at the local level in the county commissioner races right now. Like, I've got my dad, for an example, he's running for county commissioner in Person County. And there are people that are coming up to him that I would have never. It's an R+20 county. So, we know where our odds are in this place. But I've had people coming up to him that I never would have thought, that were like, I'm looking at you this year because the 5 Republicans that sit on our county commission right now have pissed me off so badly. Like, they're just not doing their jobs. And I'm like, maybe we'll get some local Democrats in some of these rural communities, because people are honestly just pissed off at the fact too that Republicans have taken so much from them in every walk of life, to me.
I do think that North Carolina, like Arizona and Wisconsin this year, the backlash to the extremist legislatures in these three states and their overreach, their extremism, their interfering in people's lives, there's something similar going on in all three states now, where I think so much is possible. It's not just the top of the ticket, it's this sense that in the state, this extremism that is manifest in the legislature, in your up and down the Republican ticket. I mean, talk a little bit about Mark Robinson, if you could, just for folks who may not really be checked in and understand, what you're up against in this election at the gubernatorial level.
Yeah, Mark Robinson, for those of you that may not get it in this little clip that I've got, you can go to realmarkrobinson.com. It's an opposition website that the state party has created to make sure that people understand every single thing that he has ever said about any issue that you could care about. But Mark Robinson is someone who had never run for public office before and became our lieutenant governor when he went, or after he went to a Greensboro city council meeting. And, after the Parkland shooting in Florida had happened, unfortunately, and said, it's not the guns that are killing people, it's the people that are killing people. And told folks that they would not take away his AR-15. And that's how Mark Robinson sort of made his foray into North Carolina politics. The Republican Party picked him up out of that city council meeting and were like, wow, this is somebody that talks a lot about gun rights. We want to make sure that he's elevated to a platform where he can do that on. No one else looked into all the heinous and hurtful things that Mark Robinson had said in his past, including the fact that he has denied the Holocaust, believes in a total abortion ban, thinks lizard people are running the government right now, doesn't actually believe in LGBTQ rights, has called LGBTQ people filth in this country, has said that women are not called to lead, other crazy, crazy things that do not belong in the mouth or coming out of the mouth of somebody that wants to be the next governor of this state and is responsible for protecting the people of North Carolina. And so, again, realmarkrobinson.com is where you can go. And we're voting for Josh Stein this year to be our next governor.
We are so excited to welcome Makena Kelly, a tech reporter for Wired. I just read your latest, Makena, from the convention. It's a Hotties for Harris world, and we're just living in it. About a party I want you to tell us about that happened at the convention that I was really sad I missed because I was exhausted and it was early in the week and I knew it was a marathon, but I heard it was very lit. So thank you for joining us. And yeah, tell us about the party and what sort of it represented in terms of the moment and the vibes, if you will, at the Democratic National Convention.
Yeah, and it's great to be here. I went to that party all last week as soon as I got to the DNC in Chicago. Everyone was talking about this Hotties for Harris party that was going to take place on Tuesday. It was going to be the big, fun party. All these content creators were going to be there, but then also, just people could come. There were campaign staffers there, all this kind of stuff. And the people who threw it were telling me that it was like a creator activation event. And, when you talk about activations in the influencer space, it's kind of just like things that they can take pictures of and do and, videos and produce content. And so I was expecting kind of what I saw, but when I walked into the venue, it was like the Museum of Ice Cream for libs. It's just a bunch of all these little places for them to take videos. There was a whole board that said Hotties for Harris, merch, a giant screen in a dance floor that had like the heads of Kamala and Tim Walz bouncing around. And, as the night progressed, it got pretty full. People seemed like they were very excited to be there.
Yeah, no, I still have FOMO that I missed it, but it's so interesting because what you're describing too, it's like a photo booth, right? Prompt that like giving content creators, and content creators are playing a massive role in this election. I think on both sides, on all sides, if you will, they have become the most powerful marketing sort of figures and tools and tactics for campaigns and for organizations doing this work to get out the vote. And I'm curious, everything has changed so much. And, TikTok is one of the most powerful platforms and will be one of the most, if not the most powerful information distribution channel that shapes the outcome of this election. And yet TikTok has a political and advocacy advertising ban. So you can't actually advertise if you're the Harris Walz campaign or the Trump campaign or target specific audiences the way that you can on Meta or other platforms like campaigns do. So it really is an organic kind of platform and strategy. And that's where content creators are so important. And I'm curious, How do you think that that is playing out or will play out in terms of not being able to measure the impact, but like where things stand on both sides, the Trump side versus the Harris Wall side, in terms of kind of organic engagement and energy on TikTok and other platforms?
Yeah, I think, when we look at TikTok, the political ban, we look at Instagram and Meta, Facebook, et cetera, banning, not amplifying political content anymore, creators have really become the replacement for that. Because at the same time, campaigns are still trying to reach these niche audiences. Maybe, with Facebook targeting with ads, it was specific demographics, specific zip codes. And now it's specific content in a specific audience that watches it. And so you have people like Jeremy Jacobowitz, who I met last week, who is a food influencer. And why is a food influencer at the DNC? Well, it's because he has a huge audience, and these are people who traditionally wouldn't have been met by CNN or the New York Times or anyone like that. So it's Jeremy with this huge audience of people who otherwise, wouldn't have been reached, getting this message directly from the DNC. And so to get at the changes from 2020 and ad targeting, I think the creators have really been a supplement to that for a lot of campaigns. Now, how both campaigns are using them is very similar, but I think that the Democrats are doing more work on those niche audiences of people and finding specific groups. Like, I did a big project where I looked at some of the most major, largest creators on both sides of the political spectrum. And when you look at the right side, they have a lot of huge creators, people with gigantic audiences. Just recently, Logan Paul and Jake Paul, who, grew to fame on Vine and were YouTubers, been around for a while. Now they're a pro boxer and a pro wrestler. They just recently talked to Donald Trump. Trump was on the Impulsive podcast. He was on Aiden Ross's show, who's another like hyper masculine creator with a huge audience. And so at the same time that the Democrats are kind of hyper targeting creators, I think, when you look at Trump, they're trying to reach this mass audience of people who at times, when you look at these audiences, are like kind of this hyper masculine type of audience.
Well, it's certainly been a sea change. I mean, look, every 4 years, the technology changes, campaigns have to adapt to the opportunities they have. But it seems like the innovation that we've seen just in the last few months, going from the Biden campaign to the Harris campaign, it feels from where we sit that that the campaign's been sort of unleashed, right? That they've had far more freedom to dive into this new world than they had before. Part of it is that they have a candidate who can sell into this world, who's very charismatic and can pop. But there's also been a huge change, I think, in attitude, right, from the campaign itself, and an embrace of sort of a new, edgier style, more edgier language. I mean, reflect about, since you've been covering this from Biden now to Harris, what is the sense that you've gotten about what you've seen about how it's evolved in the last couple of months?
Dark Brandon was funny initially.
Mhm.
And it got a little cringy and people got tired of it because guess what? It wasn't authentic to Biden. It just wasn't authentic to Biden. And so when you look at someone like Kamala Harris, who at the time was entering, when she jumped into the presidential race, there had already been a moment created for her with the Charlie XCX brat stuff. She was just popping off with the coconut stuff on TikTok. And there was this moment that I think she really rallied in that wasn't like putting her directly in the conversation, like her doing like the Apple dance or whatever. That isn't what Kamala was doing. Instead, there was these brief acknowledgments of what was happening online, but letting the people online, these communities of people who already were having fun, just go with it, right? And I think that's what has really helped the campaign in a lot of ways, which is they're not trying to inspire and create these viral moments themselves, really. They're kind of just egging on and encouraging people who are doing it themselves
Yeah,
online.
and that's a testament to just the organic grassroots energy around her. Like everybody just being excited, producing content, finding old clips, pushing it out there where the campaign doesn't have to. And when you have that enthusiasm gap, you have to try hard. And when you try hard, that's cringy, right? That's the exact opposite of what works on organic engagement. So it makes sense. And I'm curious because you're reporting on this election through the election, and this is such still kind of like the wild west of not understanding how much these vibes are going to turn into votes, where they're going to turn into votes. Are you seeing anything really kind of interesting and novel that either campaign is doing that you haven't yet reported on yet, but are sort of starting to look into, related to kind of trying to actually translate the energy that we're experiencing for the Harris Walls campaign online into actual votes?
I think the really smart thing that the Kamala campaign did was realize that this viral moment will end. at the beginning of launching her campaign, realizing that, they needed to capitalize on this quickly. And then you also had like the grassroots people, like the white dudes for Harris, all this stuff. Instead of just like letting this moment continue on and fizzle out, they've given these people the tools to actually get involved through election day. And doing that at that critical moment, right, when everything was most viral and most popular and really popping off. You had Jake Tapper on CNN learning what brat summer meant, all that kind of stuff. It was a huge moment, and capitalizing on that and giving the people the tools. And I think that's kind of, I think also just the campaign's willingness to work with a bunch of other groups. On Tuesday night, the Swifties for Harris people who, as soon as Kamala started running for office, for the presidential campaign, they gathered together, and the campaign has actually supported them. They've contacted them, given them materials and tools. And I think, that engagement and making it be like a two-way street has been really helpful in their space.
Yeah, and Taylor Swift hasn't even endorsed anyone yet. But the Swifties for Harris are out there strong.
It is, it is amazing, all this. And in part, it gets back to the fact that I think Kamala Harris comes from California, the tech and media capital of the United States, the cultural powerhouse of California. I mean, as a statewide elected, these kinds of things were not distant from her. I mean, she lived in Los Angeles with her husband. I mean, this is where she spent a lot of time. And I think the fluency she had, despite, not being a kid, right, in all these things, has really has enabled the campaign to really go. She let go. I mean, she was comfortable. I mean, her embracing Beyonce right away, right, was this sort of cultural moment that was really powerful, I think, in terms of creating an identity around her, distinction from Joe Biden, but also an identity around her. And I think people forget that, coming from California, she's really steeped in a lot of these things in a way that other people wouldn't have been in the day-to-day culture of the state. And I think that one of the things that you said, I just wanted to reflect on, was that the other thing that the Harris campaign has done is that they've asked, to your point, they've given permission and explained that they believe that the action of citizens will be critical for her success. She's created a permission structure for people to take action on her behalf. When we fight, we win. All that language around the importance of individual actions has encouraged, I think, all this creativity, similar to what we saw in '08, right? I mean, I think a lot of the most powerful moments in Obama were organic, coming from outside of the campaign. And you're really seeing this now on a level. I mean, every day I'm getting people sending me drawings, videos, right? There's been an explosion of citizen generated organic content that is unlike anything that I've ever seen. And I'm wondering, how you think this is I think it's increasing. I think the amount of activity every day is increasing as people sort of see others and are challenged by others. I mean, Nick Offerman just had this wild, incredible, organic video that he just released yesterday. I think he's now already done a second version. It's been so viral. So reflect a little bit about how you think this is all going to play out, given just the sheer volume, because I think it's going to encourage not just influencers, but very famous people now to start to really create their own content for her, and not to ask for permission from the campaign, but just to go do it themselves,
The platforms are there. With TikTok and vertical video, I think a lot of people in the space have now learned that it's part of their job. Even myself, like when I first started in journalism, how many years ago, I just wanted to be like Thomas Pynchon. Nobody saw my face. They just knew my byline, but that's not what we have anymore, right? You have to be more than this black serif font on a newspaper. And I think, with news media, I've learned that I need to do vertical video and play in this space. And now I have more experience in it than I did before. And I think everyone is learning that this is how you engage with politics, with culture, with all of these, things that happen online, and it happens through video. And I think, seeing that you can just put something online and become a moment, become a news headline, become all of these things is really inspiring to maybe, small people might, like people who just have a couple thousand followers, or people who, are just big supporters of Kamala, posting on their personal Facebook page. And then, of course, people like Nick Offerman and people who are huge celebrities.
And Simon mentioned Beyonce briefly in the role of her song Freedom in the Kamala campaign. And it made me think about, we all three just got back from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago and lived through, again, viscerally, how rumors and misinformation can spread very quickly, as it did for the last day of the convention. There was a rumor that gained a lot of traction that Beyonce was going to come perform and that she'd even done a sound check, and all the different, details that were out there that ended up to not be true, or, pretty alarming. But disinformation does and has always played a role in elections. We know, both with foreign interference from Russia and China, which we've seen again, but also just from right-wing media and Trump and his campaign itself spreading disinformation, misinformation. And we've been in this world in obviously different ways, McKenna, for a long time. So we've seen, both the reaction to 2016 and Russian interference, with all the platforms building different teams and tools to be able to monitor and deplatform accounts and disinformation and bad actors, to then rolling a lot of those policies back and getting those teams and resources and tools over the past few years. So I'm curious, how do you think disinformation and misinformation is going to play out online in this election? To the degree, what do you think we're seeing right now? And what do you think the platforms ultimately will do about it, if anything? Are they going to throw up their hands and kind of, claim that they don't have a role or responsibility? Or are you seeing them start to actually do more in response to disinformation online?
Yeah, like you mentioned, we had the big tech layoffs over the past couple of years, and an area that was really hit was the trust and safety teams at Meta, Facebook, X, and Elon Musk basically just eradicated that team entirely. And so, fortunately, we haven't seen anything that has played such a huge role, like the Hunter Biden laptop and things like that, that drove news cycles in the last election. There was the Biden robocall in New Hampshire. That was a big one of people, thinking that this random robocall was actually Biden, when it was actually a magician in New Orleans working on behalf of the Dean Phillips campaign, which is like nuts. So, I think what people are really discussing now is, I saw some headline this morning about some accounts, people who were influencers, having their photos taken from their accounts and being used to be people on Twitter spreading misinformation and support about Trump. So I think AI, and like creating these false identities, and AI helps like misinformation, disinformation get travel across, at scale. People can make this content at scale, especially if it's photo and video content. There are rules that Facebook and X and things have about fact checking these videos and fact checking this stuff. But like we saw in 2020 and in 2016, the platforms often don't move fast enough, especially when they do, even when they did have the teams in place for all of this. There was still, the drunk Nancy Pelosi video that wasn't an AI thing in 2020, but it was actually, just a slowed down video that anyone probably could have done in iMovie. And so I think, there hasn't been too much as of yet, but I think as we get closer, right, that is going to be the time where bad actors will really start to fan the flames.
That's right. And we also know, like, when they don't have a factual argument that is sticky or gains traction, they just create them on the right. And so
Or even with AI now, AI is being more used as a tool to discount real information, right? You've seen the Trump campaign and other people point to something that is just like an actual photo that was taken and saying, oh, it couldn't be, this was an AI image. And so I think maybe that right now, I've seen so much more of that than I've seen, AI generated content actually tricking people.
right. And it's just planting a seed for people, like, oh, maybe that wasn't real. And then that's all they have to do. You can't correct the record at that point. That's what they count on.
Tara, it's really interesting, your question, because it is amazing how late we are in the cycle without there having been some kind of really major event around this. Yeah, no, given our expectations, right? I mean, but part of that is that I think that the best way to counter disinformation is by being loud yourself, right? To take up the space, so it's harder for these kind of this negative viral moments to catch on. And I think the loudness of the Harris campaign, for all the things we've just been discussing, has been a central reason why it's been much harder for these kinds of mis and disinformation campaigns to work. But I do think the desperation that now exists in Trump, because I think we are winning this election now and we are ahead, and Trump is feeling it in ways that it's going to incentivize them to sort of get wilder and more crazy and to use more extreme tactics. And I assume that in coming months, but I'll just tell you, in my own Twitter feed, I've had very, very little attacks, negative engagement, because I think that the people that are behind all this stuff, the bad actors, as McKenna calls them, have still don't exactly know what to do, right? They haven't completely I think the Trump campaign itself is still flat-footed and flummoxed and hasn't really understood how to engage with this new powerful Kamala Harris campaign. But it's going to come. I mean, it's going to come, and it's going to come soon. I mean, their big negative advertising campaign begins any day now. I mean, where they're going to start dropping stuff. And my assumption is there's going to be massive amplification around crime and race and immigration. I mean, these issues where they always go, where Elon Musk has been living, frankly, and himself in the last few months. But I think the question I also just wanted to throw out there was that, we've seen a couple really interesting things happen in the last few weeks. We saw Dmitry Simes's house, who's considered to be a Russian spy in the United States, get raided by the FBI. We saw now the head of Telegram, right, get arrested over wild charges in France in the last few days. It does feel like the governments of the West are a little bit more on the front foot on this stuff and are trying to do what they can. There was that huge takedown, right, of Russian sites just a few months ago. It feels like the governments are a little bit more on their front foot, and trying to really combat these kinds of systemic bad actors, as you call them. Is there anything that you're hearing, McKenna, about this? I mean, is there any sense that you get that our government and the Western governments are being a little bit more aggressive than they've been in the past?
Sure. Well, I think they've had a lot of time to learn, right? In 2020, they were caught on their back foot and they didn't really understand what can, all these things that can happen online and how people in, Russian disinformation, Chinese misinformation that we're seeing even more now, although it hasn't been all that persuasive, according to a lot of reports that I've recently read. Yeah, I think, they're being a lot more aggressive on it because they just have background and they know a lot more how to chase it, right? Now, back to one of the points that you made earlier about our X feeds. When we talk about disinformation and misinformation, I think we all here spend a lot of time on Twitter, X, when really a lot of disinformation and misinformation are across all these different platforms. And a big driver of the misinformation on X in 2020 was Donald Trump's Twitter feed. And Donald Trump hasn't been using Twitter since he was basically removed in 2021 after January 6th. But now we're seeing him back on the platform. Ever since that conversation with Elon Musk, I've been debating, when do we write the story that Trump is back on Twitter? Because he's slowly been, putting those, all caps tweets that we're used to, yelling into the void of his so many millions of followers. And I think, Trump being back on Twitter also has the potential for some kind of change or, engaging with false information online, or at least encouraging it and bringing it back to that platform in a way that hasn't been there over the last couple of years.
And this could be a whole separate conversation in an episode, but it's so interesting because I've always thought like Elon Musk was so jealous of the power that Trump grew on Twitter. He bought the platform and he replaced Trump as the super spreader of disinformation and misinformation on the platform. He now owns and operates. And we know that that has had actual real implications abroad in elections and other issues, and expect that he will continue to play a role to kind of sow disinformation and mistrust on his own platform here too. So McKenna, so grateful that you joined us for our very first episode of Closing Strong, and hope we can chat again before the end of the election and hear what you're seeing on the internet.
Of course, this is really fun.
Thanks,
Thank
McKenna.
you all.
All right. Well, this was about as fun as I think we thought it would be. Simon, I'm so excited to do this every week with you.
I know.
For the next 9 weeks through this final sprint. And, I would love to leave the folks that are watching and of course that follow you and Hopium. And if you don't, you should sign up for Hopium, and also Courier Newsroom, everywhere you get social, with, something that they can do coming out of this. And, I think keeping it local, as we like to do at Courier, North Carolina needs support. Democrats can win North Carolina. They can win the governor's race. They can take North Carolina for the Walz-Harris campaign. So if you were wondering where to put your energy, I'm not going to tell you not to put it in states like Arizona or Michigan or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, but I think that there really is a chance in North Carolina, as we heard from Anderson, and it's a good place to consider doing the work.
Yeah, listen, my organization, my community has invested very heavily in North Carolina. I mean, Anderson is just doing a remarkable job. Just Stein, our gubernatorial candidate there, is, beating Mark Robinson. I do think it's a place where your money and your volunteerism goes a long way. And I'll add one other thing. In addition to supporting Harris, Walz, of course, getting a volunteer shift in, my site has some other House races and so on, if you want to dive into sort of House races. But I think one thing that is really important this cycle is to think about voting on day one. And what I mean by that is that because of the early vote, the way the early vote works, and the early vote's kind of a new thing in our politics. So the Democratic Party has been an election day party for a long time. We're now an early vote party. And my hope is that we win this election in October, not in November, that if we can drive up the early vote enough, if we turn out in huge numbers, we can actually create an insurmountable lead for the party in October. That's part of one of the ways we did so well in 2022. But the premise of voting on day one is that when you vote early, every night a campaign gets the list of everybody who voted that day. They don't know how you voted, but they know that you voted. And so when you vote early, you come off the GOTV rolls and the campaign can start moving on to lower propensity voters quicker. And when they move on to lower propensity voters quicker, it increases our turnout, it creates more Democrats, and it makes it more likely that we win. So one of the things that you can do to be a big citizen, to help us win the election, and also to reaffirm, the image of millions of people voting and having our election system work every day is a powerful affirmation of the power of our democracy. And so one of the ways you can help Harris Walls and local Democrats all across the country, pro-democracy warriors, is by voting on day one or voting as early as you can, in person or in mail, whatever the rules are, or in drop boxes, whatever the rules are in your state. Have a vote plan and vote as early as you can, and talk to all of your friends about joining you. Because what a great story for our democracy if the stories of the early vote are huge numbers of people all across the country voting in enormous numbers. It will be such an affirmation of our democracy in a time where it's under so much threat and challenge. And so consider voting on day one or voting early. It's a really important step you can take to help us win, but also to shore up our democracy in a time of threat.
I love that. Tell all your friends, make your plan and tell all your friends, vote on day one. I will be doing that. Thank you so much, Simon. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us. We will see you next week.
Thanks, Tara. See you, everybody.